We saw death.
We had two choices, either die or run away, but God helped us.
7-year-old Bana Alabed caught the attention of the world by posting tweets about her life in East Aleppo. But this weekend, her home was destroyed in an airstrike. Today, she and her mother said they were again under heavy bombardment. In between death and life now, they tweeted. Please keep praying for us. After 2 weeks of renewed and almost relentless air attacks, Syrian and Iranian-backed forces have made huge advances and now control about 40% of East Aleppo that was formerly held by the rebels, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. Over the weekend, government forces captured first the Hanano district, then Jabal Badro, and today Al-Sakur. So, as of this evening, opposition groups have lost control of a great deal of territory across the north of the city. All of this matters because in the Syrian civil war, the fate of Aleppo is critical. This is the country's second largest city, once its industrial centre. For the last 4 years, it's been the scene of a bloody war of attrition, a stalemate. But Russia's intervention on the side of the Syrian government has now swung the balance against the rebels, decisively so.
This is a continuing nearly 6 years now of protracted conflict, man-made crisis, and we need a political solution because there will be no humanitarian solution. We can do our best to fill the gaps, and there will certainly be no military solution.
But the Russian and Syrian governments disagree, hoping to take Aleppo while America's distracted by the transition to a new president and the rest of the world stands by. So the battle for Aleppo appears finally to be reaching a turning point. And for the estimated 250,000 civilians still trapped in the east, an uncertain and dangerous future. James Landell, BBC News.
Shiraz Maher is a lecturer in war studies at King's College London and a leading analyst of the conflict in Syria. He joins us now from our central London studio. Thanks for taking the time. In terms of the civilians, obviously so much focus on what happens to them now, those trapped still there in Aleppo, plus those who are fleeing.
Exactly. This is a huge humanitarian crisis. I mean, we've already seen the Syrian conflict in general present one of the greatest displacements of people and one of the greatest humanitarian crises since the Second World War. What's happening in Aleppo, in eastern Aleppo right now, is an acute version of that. This is a part of rebel-held territory that has effectively been besieged since about late January, with periodic moments when supplies could get in. But if you imagine, the people who are inside today are basically starving. They're running out of fuel, they're running out of energy to heat their homes and keep themselves warm. Winter is coming. So you have a population that is getting desperate, and people inside are really at their wits' end now.
What will happen to them, and was there any possibility of them escaping before now? I mean, obviously civilians on all sides are suffering in Syria.
Well, there have been opportunities. Look, a lot of people left eastern Aleppo. They chose to go. But ultimately, for those who have chosen to remain, they're saying this is where their homes are. This is where they live. Why should they surrender this territory to Bashar al-Assad? And if they were to leave, where would they go? A lot of the times, the Assad regime has said they have the opportunity to come back and cross over back into his territory. But people don't want to do that. He has not got any goodwill left. This is a man who, for the last 5 or 6 years, has systematically brutalized, killed, exterminated anybody that has dared to resist or defy him. So if you are a resident of eastern Aleppo, and just a few weeks ago I was talking to some of them as part of my research, they were saying they're not prepared to cross over into regime-held territory because they don't trust Bashar al-Assad. So where are they supposed to go? For many of them, just to be present in eastern Aleppo is an act of defiance. This is a revolution. They feel that they need to defy the regime. Their defiance isn't born of the fact that they think they'll win or that they think there's a better life for them. It's born of the fact that they're sick and tired and fed up of this tyrant.
Do people fear now that those civilians' lives are directly at risk? Because obviously this has been a long and complex game. And also, what about the responsibility of the rebels? We call them rebels, but you know, these are people who are militants. There's a lot of money coming in from the Gulf and other countries to support these groups, with civilians, innocent people, women and children trapped in the middle.
There are absolutely civilians trapped in the middle. It's them that we need to focus on. There are jihadist elements who are fighting inside eastern Aleppo, but there are also secular forces that are present. Same goes for the groups that have been trying to break this siege from the outside. What matters most is the fact that the people who have remained in eastern Aleppo are being subjected to a vicious extermination campaign that is being led by Putin and Assad. And
but what
they
about,
are the
what
ones...
about the responsibility of other countries, you know, the Sunni states who backed these terrorist forces?
Well, the Sunni states have to take responsibility for the forces that they have backed. These forces have committed excesses. But let's be very clear, who is driving principally the deaths of the civilians in eastern Aleppo? I'm afraid to say it's not the rebel fighters who are in there. It is Russia and it is Putin that are deliberately targeting hospitals. Don't forget, there has been a very deliberate and calculated campaign to target hospitals and schools in eastern Aleppo. So yes, the rebels have committed crimes. They do need to be held accountable. But who has committed the greatest crimes in Syria to date, even worse than anything ISIS has achieved? It's Bashar al-Assad and his regime.
You were formerly a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir, an extremist group here in the UK. I know you turned your back on all that. When you look at what's happened in Syria, it is, you know, it's an unimaginable horror, really. Where do you think this move now leaves us, and also the kind of the potential radicalisation of the population, again, on all sides?
Well, let me be clear firstly. I left that more than 10 years, more than 11 years ago. I've been out for longer, twice as long, in fact, than I was in it. I don't know why you bring that up. I'm now an academic. I've coming on the show today because I've done a PhD. I've worked on this topic for a number of years. I'm being called on, not because of my understanding as an ex-radical, but because of my academic expertise. So I don't feel you've preceded that question in an at all fair manner. To be very frank, if you're asking will people on the ground be radicalized, of course they will be. They're being brutalized by their regime. They feel abandoned and betrayed. What are they going to do? People get desperate in these circumstances.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't need to... we obviously have a limited amount of time, so I don't want to give the full history. And I said that you have turned your back on that, and you're well known... Well, you're well known for that. I was asking you because, obviously, the fear of radicalisation and what this conflict is doing to people on all sides is a great fear going forward. You know, quite apart from the fact that it's not even close to being resolved, the situation in Syria.
Of course, you have a deeply fractured society in Syria on all sides. You have a deeply distrustful society. The Alawis and the Shias are rightfully very concerned and scared about their future in Syria because of the sectarianism that has been unleashed by this conflict. The Sunnis are similarly distrustful of their future. Beyond that, you have ethnic crises between Kurds and Arabs. You have secular forces who are fighting against jihadist forces. There are multiple wars within wars taking place here, all of which shows that even when Aleppo is taken, and I dare say Aleppo will fall now relatively soon, it's being crushed at a relatively alarming rate. Whenever that happens, that is not the end of this conflict. This is something that will continue to burn, and the aftermath of it will be with us for a generation or so. OK,
Shiraz Maher, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, thousands of Cubans have taken to the streets in Havana to pay their respects to Fidel Castro, who died aged 90 on Friday. Castro ruled the communist island for decades. He was seen by some as a revolutionary who stood up to the United States, but as an oppressive dictator by others. Will Grant reports from Havana.
From early morning they came, from the young to the elderly and frail. This was no ordinary day for Cubans. It was a chance to say a final goodbye to a man who influenced and shaped their entire lives and dictated the direction of the country for generations.
Even old people and young people, we have something to thank to him. We have free education, we have free medicine, we have social assistance today free, thanks to him.
A huge cross-section of Cuban society is here, from staunch supporters to those who are now quite disillusioned with the government. Some are here because they loved Fidel Castro, others have been told to be by the government. Either way, tens of thousands of people will troop past in silence. Fidel Castro's public send-off began with full military honours, the national anthem and a 21-cannon salute. Once the mourners reached the José Martí monument, Castro's ashes weren't inside, as many had expected. Instead, a simple tribute to the country's original revolutionary. Still, it left many deeply affected by the experience.
He'll never die, said this grieving supporter.
Until victory, always, shouted another.
Pude lograr todos mis sueños.
He made me realize my dreams, gave me my education, my family's healthcare, and my rights.
Disfrutar de mis derechos.
From Havana, the ashes will be transported to their final resting place in the eastern city of Santiago. Whatever Cubans carry in their hearts about Fidel Castro, they're going to keep coming to say goodbye for days. Will Grant, BBC News, Havana.
Well, the US President-elect Donald Trump has been tweeting about Cuba. He said he will scrap the US deal with Cuba unless Havana offers a better one. Well, Mr. Trump also used Twitter to claim that millions of people voted illegally in the presidential election. The president-elect tweeted there was serious voter fraud in Virginia, New Hampshire and California, accusing the media of bias in not reporting it. He said if these millions of illegal votes, as he called them, were discounted, he would have won the popular vote as well as the Electoral College. He also said that given Hillary Clinton had conceded and that nothing would change with a recount. Let's get more now. Our correspondent Jane O'Brien is in Washington for us. We've just been hearing from the White House, I think, haven't we, on this whole question of whether there was any fraud in this election.
Well, Geeta, I think what this boils down to is that 2 weeks after the election, there are still an awful lot of people, including Mr. Trump himself, who cannot accept the election results. So on the one hand, you have recounts in at least one state, which the polls predicted he wasn't supposed to have won. That's because people there cannot understand how Mrs. Clinton won the popular vote by more than 2 million, but still lost the election. And Donald Trump, for his part, seems to be very stung by that disbelief and is alleging, completely without any foundation at all, that he would have won the popular vote had there not been widespread voter fraud. But I think it's important to realise that had there been fraud, there's no proof that any of this happened. Mr. Trump himself has offered no evidence at all of voter fraud. Had it happened, 2 million people, 2 million votes, that would be unprecedented in US history. And the White House has also said there's absolutely no evidence.
Well, of course, who is going to serve in a Trump presidency is being much talked about. And Mr. Trump is seeing General Petraeus, former very high-ranking military officer, of course. There's a lot of reporting of kind of problems and divisions within his team as to who should get the top jobs, like Secretary of State.
Well, General Petraeus has only recently emerged as a potential pick for Secretary of State because of Mitt Romney. Now, Mitt Romney, as you may remember, was one of the first senior-ranking Republicans to say that Donald Trump was not fit to be president. Now Mr. Trump is mulling the possibility that he could be his Secretary of State. Lots of Trump supporters don't want anything to do with that. They say it's a loyalty question. So enter David Petraeus, who by all accounts is a brilliant general, fell from grace, though, when he had to plead guilty for passing classified information to his mistress. And if he is picked, he would still be on probation as a result of criminal proceedings in that case. So very, very interesting. Nobody really knows what's going to happen next. And that's what makes being in Washington right now extraordinarily exciting, Geeta.
Yes, I think lots of us would quite like to join you there, Jane. Thanks very much indeed. Let's have a catch up with some of the day's other news now. And police in the American state of Ohio say they've shot dead a man who attacked students at one of the country's biggest universities. 8 people were injured in the assault, which began when a car was driven into a crowd at Ohio State University. The driver then began attacking people with a knife. Police are investigating whether there's a link to terrorism. A former football youth coach who's at the centre of a sex abuse scandal in Britain is being treated in hospital. Barry Bonnell, who has convictions for molesting young players, was found unconscious on Friday night. His case has sparked investigations across Britain into abuse in youth football. France now, where the former Prime Minister Francois Fillon has been chosen to be the centre-right candidate in next year's presidential election. He's proposing dramatic economic reforms that include slashing 500,000 public jobs, ending the 35-hour week and increasing the retirement age. He'll face a socialist candidate as well as Marine Le Pen of the far-right National Front. Hugh Schofield reports from Paris.
France woke this morning with a feeling that there's something new in the air. Francois Fillon, the mild-mannered outsider with the radical economics, is the country's new centre-right leader. Quite likely, its next head of state. Fillon's victory over the favourite Alain Juppé was emphatic. The surge of support in the last week is a sign of how, for many voters on the right, he's suddenly become the receptacle of hope.
My ambition is to pull France up to be the best it can be, and I can assure you that if in 2017 we take things firmly into our hands, then our country will go far.
On the streets of Paris today, there was a positive reception to the new candidate.
I think he represents the France of the countryside, the France of craftsmen. All those who weren't voting before now find some hope in him.
He's a good candidate, but I don't think he would be a good president because he can harm a lot of French people with important social changes.
François Fillon and the centre-right are basking in the glow of victory now, but the counter-strike will not be long in coming, and here's why. The Fillon programme is very radical. It calls for big cuts in state spending, longer working hours, looser work contracts. For his enemies on the French left and on the far right, these are easy targets.
Marine Le Pen of the Front National is already girding for the fray. She'll portray Fillon as a new slave to globalisation. And the socialists? Well, focus now is going to shift to their choice of candidate. Will it be François Hollande again, or Prime Minister Manuel Valls, or another? France's presidential campaign is starting to get very interesting. Hugh Schofield, BBC News, Paris.
Well, joining us now to discuss Fillon's triumph and what happens next in the run-up to the May election is James Shiels, a professor in French politics from Aston University here in the UK. Thanks very much for your time. Is Fillon really the person that can capture the left and unify people against Marine Le Pen? Because in a way, don't his politics alienate some of those people if he's talking about a longer working week and higher pension age?
Absolutely. He's not at all a candidate who can easily capture the left. That is his problem. He comes out of this election with a huge mandate, but a mandate from a very narrow strip of the electorate, something close to 3 million voters around the Republican Party voted for him out of a total 4.3 million. Now, he needs to be able to appeal to 45 million in the presidential election. So that's his first challenge. How does he now work on a programme that can open up an appeal much wider than that which he exercised to win this primary?
And what about the left itself? Because obviously a lot of movement which we will see in the new year in terms of their candidate.
That's right. This is Act 1 in a 3-act drama. And we now know the identity of the lead role on the centre-right. But Act 2 will be the primary elections for the Socialist Party in late January, in which François Hollande is very likely to stand, despite his desperate unpopularity. And the third and final act, of course, will be the presidential elections themselves. So we've never been in this position before. 5 months out from a presidential election, we've just learned who the centre-right candidate is. We don't know who the centre-left candidate is. This is new territory.
People have been saying, though, that François Fillon is now odds-on favourite to become the next French president. Do you think those assumptions still hold, or does no one dare make any political predictions anywhere right now?
Well, I think we've had a few painful lessons in political predictions of late. Voters in this primary election cast their vote on two main questions. Who can we see as president? And who can beat Marine Le Pen to get there? Because it's Marine Le Pen, not the socialist candidate, who's touted to be in the second round runoff. Now, this again is unprecedented, choosing a centre-right candidate to beat the far right rather than the left.
OK, James Shiels, Professor, thanks very much indeed. A new study of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia has found 2/3 of the coral has died along a large section in the north following increased water temperatures earlier this year. The mass bleaching event struck in the most pristine part of the reef. Our correspondent Hal Griffith was given exclusive access to see the research take place.
The planet's largest living structure, struggling for survival. This coral should be alive with colour, but it's bleached and barren. These scientists are part of a team that's assessed the health of the entire Great Barrier Reef, an area bigger than Britain. And here the prognosis is poor. On average, 2/3 of the coral in the northern section has died.
I've been coming here for 20 years and to see it in this state is just, devastating. In April there was a hell of a lot of colonies up in that area. They were bleached, they were badly bleached, some were already dying, and now we go back and there's just no corals.
We visited Lizard Island, where the impact was worst. For 3 months, water temperatures were at least 1 degree Celsius above average, enough to cook some of the coral and make others starve after expelling the colourful organisms which convert sunlight to food. So what used to be a living rainbow of colour down there has now been left largely lifeless in brown and white. In this one northern part of the Great Barrier Reef, the scientists think over 90% of the coral has been killed. This is, the scientists conclude, a man-made problem. The warming temperatures caused by carbon emissions. The question for those who live and work here is whether the reef can recover.
These events keep happening on an increasingly small timescale. It can't possibly keep up with that.
And so this could become the new norm?
It could, yeah, absolutely. The trajectory is not good. We're still pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and this happened absolutely because of that.
Vast in scale, the reef underpins a huge industry. 2.5 million people visit each year. In the waters around Cairns, the impact has been far less severe. Only 6% of the coral has perished. Businesses here are keen to stress this part of the reef is alive and well, but they're also mindful of the future.
Without the Great Barrier Reef, we wouldn't survive. So it is absolutely of the utmost importance that we ensure that our politicians and everybody else in our community and around the world are doing what they can to ensure that the reef survives.
Survival will depend on how warm these waters become. 2016 is set to be the hottest year on record. It may already have seen one of the Earth's great wonders change forever. Howell Griffith, BBC News on the Great Barrier Reef.
Now, we've probably all embarrassed ourselves with our lack of knowledge at some point, at least that's what the producer's written. I'm not sure I agree, but we should spare a thought for the Bollywood actress Shilpa Shetty, because she was asked for suggestions about books for children, and she recommended George Orwell's novel Animal Farm on the basis that it would teach youngsters how to care for pets. Well, as pretty much everyone knows, I think it is not exactly a cuddly children's book. The 1945 novel is quite an adult satire on 20th century dictatorship. Well, as you can imagine, the blunder has sparked a wave of mocking tweets online under the hashtag Shilpa Shetty Reviews. This is one of our favourites from Vishal Purohit. 50 Shades of Grey is an amazing colouring book. Children will love it. Plenty more, I've tweeted a few for you. A family of rare pygmy marmosets has been reunited 2 days after they were stolen from an Australian wildlife park. 2 adult monkeys and a baby seen here before the theft were snatched from their enclosure at the Symbio Wildlife Park south of Sydney. It's understood there is a black market for marmosets, which are the smallest monkey in the world. Police have charged 2 men after a tip-off from the public. The monkeys were hungry and distressed, but otherwise absolutely fine. That's it from me. The weather's coming up. I'm Geetha Gurumurthy on Twitter. See you soon.